Are you ready to continue our journey investigating the ancient Hebrew calendar? We've only just begun to clear away the top layer, looking for the treasures underneath. There are so many more incredible discoveries that await. When the claim is made that the real Jewish calendar has been rediscovered, what does that mean exactly? It is a subtle thing, but this subtlety leads to the most important discovery. To be clear, the basic structure and operation of the Jewish calendar has not changed over thousands of years. The claim is not that there is a completely different type of calendar that once existed. The key lies in the way the calendar is tied to the seasons in order to keep it synchronized. This might seem like it wouldn't matter that much, but the manner in which the year is synchronized affects when specific dates actually occurred in history. And that is the ultimate goal, to make sure we have accurate dates. Let's review. The Jewish calendar is a luni-solar calendar. Each month consists of a full cycle of the phases of the moon, with each cycle lasting roughly 29 and a half days. Since a day cannot be less than 24 hours, or be half a day in length, a month is either 29 or 30 full days long. 12 months makes up a year, and therefore a normal year is 354 days. The time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun is roughly 365 and a quarter days. That means each lunar year of 354 days is about 11 days short of a solar year. After several years, this difference would lead to months being out of sync with the seasons. To fix this, every 2 or 3 years, an extra month is added just before the spring equinox, so that the first month of the religious year is kept aligned with the seasons. This additional month every 2 or 3 years happens in a predictable pattern and is called the Metonic cycle. It consists of a repeatable 19-year pattern. These are the most basic elements of the modern Jewish calendar. Let's get to our next layer. Exactly where and when did the modern Jewish calendar originate? Those who have researched the history of the modern Jewish calendar, such as in the book Calendar and Community by Stern, identify Hillel II as the person who codified the current rules of the calendar. The calendar was originally managed by the religious leaders for many centuries during the time the temple in Jerusalem existed. From 70 AD onwards, after the destruction of the temple, it became increasingly difficult to manage the calendar as the population dispersed. There was no reliable way to communicate the start of each new month over those vast distances. The need for the various sacrifices faded from importance due to the absence of the temple in Jerusalem. Certain religious aspects could no longer be done, and therefore the sole reliance on religious leaders to oversee the operation of the calendar gave way to a broader knowledge of the calculations and the various rules of calendar construction. It is certain that the particular pattern of the Metonic cycle was in its present form from at least 350 AD onwards. In researching the previous information, this seems to be where scholars have stopped their investigations. For me, the significant question that arises is whether there is any evidence of what the pattern of intercalation was going further back through history. I cannot find anyone else who has researched this area. As far as I'm aware, what I'll be now presenting is original research that very few are aware of. A very valuable chronological resource exists, which has been available, or which has used available archaeological information to reconstruct the calendar dates for the Babylonian, Persian, and Seleucid periods, from 600 BC to 75 AD. This resource is the Babylonian Chronology. The authors speculate that the intercalations, or leap months, used during the Babylonian period began with the reign of Nabonassar, circa 747 BC. The calendar of this time intercalated either in the spring or in the autumn before settling on a fixed pattern. Up until about 600 BC, the intercalations are wildly erratic, some years occurring in spring and some occurring in autumn. Interestingly, after about 600 BC, when the Jewish exile to Babylon begins, the intercalations are shifted almost completely from autumn to spring, which is the start of the religious year for the Jewish people. This period also marks the beginning of the final fixed intercalation pattern, which does not change over the subsequent centuries. Is this evidence of the rise of influence of the prophet Daniel as he becomes the head of the Magi in the Babylonian kingdom during this time? This group of Magi, or astrologers, was in charge of determining the calendar for the regional empire. That is a question for further research. Getting back to the topic, taking the information from the previous chart, it can be reworked with the associated Jewish year along with the Julian year. The years with an extra month can be placed in the proper place in the chart. What emerges is the cycle that was in place during that era. It is a sequence of 1, 4, 7, 10, 12, 15, and 18. Compare this with the modern sequence, and you can see that the cycles are not the same. The current cycle is shifted 1 year previous. So the precedent exists that the Metonic cycle for the Jewish calendar has been anchored to a different year. As far as I can tell, no one else has ever recognized this before. Is there yet more evidence that exists? Yes, a great deal more. It comes from a long-forgotten and unrecognized source. One of Google's projects was to digitize long out-of-print books and make them available for public access. There is a book which was published in 1878 and has never been republished. One copy has been laying on an obscure shelf in a seldom visited dark corner of a library before the digitizers chose to preserve its valuable contents. This book is an English translation of Al-Biruni's Vestiges of the Past. He was a Muslim scholar from around 1000 AD. His book describes the technical and historical aspects of various calendars from cultures such as the Persians, Arabs, and Zoroastrians, and including the Jews. Encyclopedia Britannica's entry on Al-Biruni states that it preserves the best pre-modern description of the cultures Al-Biruni came to know. In this latter work, for example, is the most elaborate treatment of the Jewish calendar, more extensive than any surviving medieval Hebrew source and much more scientifically reasoned than any other treatment that this calendar had received up until that time. He discusses intercalation cycles in 2 different sections of his book. The first is something he calls the Table of Kebioth, which functions like a Rosetta Stone for converting dates. It allows conversion between the modern Jewish years, the Julian calendar years, and years tied to Alexander the Great. It is important to note that at the time Al-Biruni wrote his treatise on the calendar, that Hillel had already codified the modern rules for the Jewish calendar. Al-Biruni's table can be investigated and the Metonic cycle in use can be determined. Similar to the information in the Babylonian Chronology, a spreadsheet can be constructed and the Jewish years can be associated with the Julian years. If you then divide each Jewish year by 19, the remainder that is left can be recorded. If an additional month was added for that particular remainder, then these years can be marked. The Metonic cycle in use then becomes evident. Here, the cycle is 1, 4, 7, 9, 12, 15, and 18. Al-Biruni's Table of Kebioth does not use the modern Metonic cycle. Even though he constructed this chart using contemporary years, for example around 1000 AD, The significant thing to notice is that he did not use the modern Metonic cycle. It reflects the Metonic pattern from over 600 years prior, that in the Babylonian era. Actually, in his entire work, the modern Metonic cycle cannot be found at all. The area of what was to become modern Iraq and Iran continued to use the Metonic cycle first used during the ancient Babylonian Empire. Since Al-Biruni lived in this area, it makes perfect sense that his charts make use of this particular pattern. The other section in his book discusses the intercalation cycle still used in the Syrian locale, the location of the ancient Jewish population. Now, although they agreed on the equality of the year as to the order of intercalation in the cycle, when it has to take place and when not, they differed among each other regarding the nature of the beginning of the cycles. And for some take the current year of the era Adami, that is, the Jewish year, of which you want to know whether it is a common year or a leap year, and reduce the number of years to cycles by dividing them by 19. Then you get complete cycles, and as a remainder, the years of the cycle not yet finished, including the current year. And then the order of the leap years is fixed according to the formula, i.e. the 2nd, 5th, 7th, 10th, 13th, 16th, and 18th years. Others take the years of the same era Adami, or Jewish year, subtract 1 year and fix the order of the leap years in the remainder of the years of the incomplete cycles according to the formula, i.e. the 1st, 4th, 6th, 9th, 12th, 15th, and 17th years. These two cycles are attributed to the Jews of Syria. What you notice if you compare these two cycles, since one just uses a subtraction, the resulting cycles are exactly the same across the 19-year cycle. The very important point to notice is that this Metonic cycle, anchored to these particular years, was what was used in the Syrian locale, that is, the area of the ancient Jewish homeland. And it is from the time period of the biblical era, even before the Temple and Jerusalem were destroyed in 70 AD. Sharp-eyed viewers will realize that there are 3 different intercalation cycles now represented. There are actually 4, but one of them is just a slight variation of the other. Using some simple math, we can build a chart for any sequence of years to compare the different cycles and which years are specified to have an additional month. Let's take the sequence of years between 8 BC and 38 AD. For example, year 1 AD is Jewish year 3761. 3761 divided by 19 has a remainder of 18. The modern Jewish calendar rules state to not add a month for this year. The Babylonian Artaxerxes rule state that an additional month should be added for this year. The rules for the ancient Jewish homeland also state to add an additional month for this year. This can be continued for a series of years to generate a chart. What does this then mean? What does this prove? So let's again take the example of Nisan 1, the beginning of the first month of the religious year. What would be the equivalent date in 1 AD? According to the modern Jewish calendar rules, no intercalary month should be added. Nisan 1 would be equivalent to March 14th. According to the Babylonian calendar rules, the intercalary month should be added. Nisan 1 would be equivalent to April 12th. This would be the same with the ancient Jewish homeland rules, where the Jewish people lived. So this is a significant difference, a difference of an entire month. Using the current modern Jewish calendar to determine that a date in history happened in March is quite different from that of the ancient Jewish calendar, which states that the same Jewish date actually happened in April. Can this be possible? Could many of the dates that scholars have assumed all this time actually be incorrect? Why hasn't this been noticed before? I think you can see why this could very well be possible. It is somewhat complicated to get your head around, isn't it? But once you understand the mechanics of the calendar, it is obvious. However, most experts that I've investigated make statements where it is quite plain that they don't understand the mechanics of the Jewish calendar. For example, many state that the Jewish calendar is made up of 360-day years. It is easy to show that with a lunar calendar, a typical year is 354 days long, and with an intercalary month, the year is 384 days long. There is no way to get a 360-day year. Due to their incorrect statement alone, anything that they state about ancient dates is suspect. But which one of these Metonic cycles is actually correct to use for historical dates? Are there any other evidences that would support this groundbreaking discovery? There are. It would take some time to explain things fully, but to be brief, the original Jewish calendar is tied to certain unique agricultural keys. During the Temple era, the spring religious feasts depended on having ripe barley for religious rituals. The specific life cycle of winter barley leads to the Metonic cycle being tied to a certain anchor year, that of the cycle in the Syrian area we have now rediscovered. Specifically, the Jewish homeland. Not the Jewish Metonic cycle, though, and not the Babylonian area cycle. Both the modern cycle and the Babylonian cycle are not tied to the specific life cycle of winter barley in the homeland of the Jews. This alone disqualifies using the modern Jewish intercalation cycle to determine ancient dates. In addition, Josephus, the Jewish historian, often includes information to date historical events that he records. Some dates just do not make sense, according to the modern Jewish calendar. Scholars cannot reconcile his information and conclude he was in error. However, if one considers the intercalation cycle of the ancient Syrian area, which has now been rediscovered, then the dates are easily resolved. And finally, the timing of various eclipses, both solar and lunar, give evidence to the rediscovered Metonic cycle of the Jewish homeland. These eclipse records have been meticulously determined by NASA and are an independent source which verifies this research. Other videos will examine these topics in much greater detail. In order to explain them fully, a lot of calculations must be shown. The goal of this presentation has been to present the issue as simply as possible and show that there is some long-forgotten information that modern scholarship has not recognized. Admittedly, intercalation is very technical, which can be confusing at first. However, it is extremely important, and the accuracy of ancient dates depends on getting this information correct. Other presentations will demonstrate that by using this information, suddenly well-known issues with ancient dates resolve themselves. For example, determining the actual year of Jesus Christ's birth and death become easily evident. It has been fascinating to dig through long-forgotten ancient documents to discover the treasures that are there. This lays the foundation that many other discoveries are built on and will be revealed. I have published a book that examines all these discoveries in great detail. It describes the rediscovery of the ancient Jewish calendar along with many other discoveries that result from this. Prophecies which have confused many people throughout the centuries can now be understood in a consistent and literal fashion. Various problematic dates of biblical events can be more easily determined. It contains references to all the documented sources so you can verify these things for yourself. Thanks for joining me as we have uncovered long-lost information which has a direct impact on our understanding of the ancient past.